Paul McCartney was born on June 18, 1942, in Liverpool, England. His childhood was simple, surrounded by family, friends, and music. His father, Jim, played piano and trumpet and often filled the house with melodies. Paul's mother, Mary, worked as a nurse and gave him love and discipline. Sadly, when Paul was just 14, his mother died of cancer. This loss deeply affected him and later shaped his songwriting, especially the emotional songs that touched millions. Even as a child, Paul showed talent for music. He learned to play his father's old piano and experimented with different sounds. He picked up the guitar as a teenager, even though he was left-handed and had to restring it to play properly. His early musical inspirations were Buddy Holly, Little Richard, and Elvis Presley. They opened his imagination to the idea of becoming a musician himself. Liverpool in the 1950s was not an easy place. Bombing from World War II had left scars on the city, and work was hard to find. Music became a kind of escape for young people like Paul. Skiffle, a popular music style at the time, gave many teenagers a way to start bands with cheap instruments. Paul was no different. No one in Liverpool could have guessed that this boy, with his charm and love for melodies, would one day become one of the most famous musicians in history, but fate had already begun writing his path. Paul's life changed forever in July 1957. A friend introduced him to a boy named John Lennon, who had a band called the Quarrymen. They were performing at a church festival, and John immediately stood out with his wit, confidence, and rebellious style. Paul, just 15 years old, watched closely and then impressed John by playing a song on the guitar. He even showed John how to tune his instrument correctly. That moment began one of the greatest partnerships in music history. John admired Paul's musical skill, while Paul admired John's fearless personality. They balanced each other. John had the sharp edge, and Paul had the melodic heart. Paul soon joined the Quarrymen, and together they started dreaming of something bigger. They spent hours writing songs inspired by their favorite rock and roll records. It wasn't always easy. They argued, laughed, and pushed each other to do better, but both knew they had something special. Their friendship was more than just about music. They had both lost their mothers at a young age, and that shared pain made their bond even stronger. Music became their way of healing, their way of dreaming. At this stage, they had no idea they would become part of a band that would change the world. But the seeds were planted. The chemistry between John Lennon and Paul McCartney was unlike anything else. Together, they were about to set history in motion. The Quarrymen slowly evolved into something new. With the addition of George Harrison, a young guitarist Paul introduced to John, the group began to shape its sound. Later, Ringo Starr would join as the drummer, completing the lineup that would become the Beatles. In the early days, they weren't yet the global superstars people know today. They played in small clubs, especially in Hamburg, Germany, where they performed long nights in smoky bars. Those shows were tough, but they made the band strong and polished their skills. Paul especially learned how to hold an audience with his charm and energy. By the early 1960s, the Beatles were gaining attention in Liverpool. They performed regularly at the Cavern Club, attracting a loyal fan base. It was here that manager Brian Epstein discovered them. He cleaned up their image, put them in suits, and started planning their rise to fame. Paul was often seen as the cute Beatle, but behind the scenes he was ambitious and driven. He wanted the Beatles to be more than just another band. His songwriting with John began to shine, creating a catalog of songs that would soon sweep the world. What started as a group of Liverpool boys playing for fun was becoming something far greater. With Paul's musical gifts, John's sharpness, George's guitar, and Ringo's steady drumming, the Beatles were ready for takeoff. The world was about to meet them. By 1963, the Beatles were no longer just a local act. Their single, Please Please Me, hit the charts, and suddenly they were everywhere in Britain. Crowds screamed at every show, girls fainted, reporters followed them from city to city. A new word was born, Beatlemania. Paul loved the excitement. He enjoyed the attention, the interviews, and the chance to connect with fans. His charm made him one of the most beloved members of the group. Songs like All My Loving and Can't Buy Me Love showed his gift for writing melodies that were both catchy and heartfelt. But the fame also brought challenges. The Beatles couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed by fans. Traveling became exhausting. Still, Paul kept his energy high, often encouraging the others, Hen they felt worn out. The band's popularity soon spread beyond the UK. When they appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in America in 1964, over 70 million people watched. The Beatles became an international sensation overnight. Paul, with his boyish smile and smooth voice, became a global heartthrob. This was just the beginning. The Beatles weren't just playing music anymore. They were leading a cultural revolution. And Paul McCartney was right at the center of it, guiding the band with his creativity and ambition. As the Beatles matured, so did their music. Paul McCartney quickly proved himself to be one of the greatest songwriters of his generation. Along with John Lennon, he formed the famous Lennon-McCartney partnership, a duo that created some of the most timeless songs ever written. Paul's songwriting style was different from John's. While John often leaned toward raw, personal, and sometimes darker lyrics, Paul loved melody and structure. He had an instinct for creating songs that were instantly memorable. Tracks like Yesterday, which he famously dreamed up in his sleep, showed his gift for emotional storytelling through music. Yesterday became one of the most covered songs in history, but it was just one of many. Paul also wrote or co-wrote classics like Hey Jude, Let It Be, Penny Lane, and Blackbird. Each one displayed a different side of his genius: hope, sadness, reflection, and joy. What made Paul unique was his versatility. He wasn't just a bassist. He played piano, guitar, drums, and more. In the studio, he was often the perfectionist, pushing himself and the band to reach new heights. Sometimes this caused tension, especially with John, but it also produced music that defined an era. By the mid-1960s, Paul was no longer just a member of a popular band. He was becoming one of the most respected musicians in the world, and the best was still to come. The Beatles stopped touring in 1966, exhausted from the chaos of constant concerts. Instead, they turned to the recording studio, where Paul's creativity truly thrived. He loved experimenting with sounds, instruments, and new recording techniques. Albums like Revolver and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band showed Paul's imagination. On Sgt. Pepper, Paul came up with the idea of creating a fictional band, giving the Beatles freedom to reinvent themselves. The result was groundbreaking, an album many still call one of the greatest of all time. Paul's influence could be felt on songs like Eleanor Rigby, which used only a string quartet, and When I'm 64, a playful tune inspired by old-time music. His ability to blend pop, classical, and rock made him stand out. But behind the music, tensions were growing. Paul often took control in the studio, which frustrated John, George, and Ringo. Some saw him as bossy, but Paul believed he was keeping the band moving forward. He pushed them to try new things, and while it sometimes caused fights, it also produced masterpieces. The late Beatles years were marked by both brilliance and conflict. Paul's ambition and energy were unstoppable, but cracks in the group were beginning to show. The world loved the Beatles more than ever, but inside the band, things were starting to fall apart. By 1969, the dream was crumbling. The Beatles were no longer the tight-knit group they had once been. Business troubles, personal differences, and creative clashes created constant tension. Paul tried hard to keep the band together, but it wasn't enough. The recording of Let It Be showed the conflict. Cameras captured the arguments, the frustrations, and the growing distance between the members. Paul still gave the world one of his most powerful songs, Let It Be, inspired by a dream of his mother, but the harmony of the band was gone. In 1970, Paul made it official. He announced he was leaving the Beatles. The world was shocked. For fans, it felt like the end of an era. For Paul, it was heartbreaking, but also necessary. Many saw Paul as the one who broke up the band, but he later explained that the split was inevitable. Everyone was pulling in different directions. Still, Paul faced anger from fans and critics who blamed him. The end of the Beatles was painful, but Paul wasn't finished. he still had songs to write, albums to make, and dreams to chase. While the greatest band in history had ended, Paul McCartney's story was far from over. After the Beatles, Paul needed a fresh start. In 1971, he formed a new band with his wife Linda McCartney called Wings. At first, many doubted him. Could Paul succeed without the Beatles? Wings had a shaky beginning, but Paul's determination pushed them forward. With Linda on keyboards, Denny Lane on guitar, and other changing members, Wings slowly built their identity. They toured relentlessly, sometimes in small halls, starting from scratch. The hard work paid off. Songs like Band on the Run, Jet, and Live and Let Die proved Paul still had his magic. Wings became one of the most successful bands of the 1970s, earning critical and commercial success. Paul's partnership with Linda was central to this era. Their love and teamwork gave him strength after the chaos of the Beatles. Together they faced critics, raised a family, and built a life outside the shadow of John Lennon and the Beatles. Wings gave Paul freedom. He could explore new sounds, connect with fans in smaller settings, and prove that he wasn't just living on past glory. He was still writing hits, still filling stadiums, and still one of the greatest musicians in the world. The 1980s were a time of both heartbreak and resilience for Paul. In December 1980, John Lennon was murdered in New York City. For Paul, it was devastating. He had lost not just a former bandmate, but a friend with whom he had shared the most important years of his life. The loss left him shaken, and he struggled with how to talk about it publicly. Around the same time, Paul faced personal and professional challenges. Music trends were changing, and critics sometimes dismissed his new work as lightweight. But Paul never stopped creating. He collaborated with artists like Stevie Wonder and Michael Jackson, producing hits such as Ebony and Ivory and Say, Say, Say. The greatest tragedy came in 1998, when Linda McCartney died of cancer. She had been Paul's partner in life and music for nearly 30 years. Losing her was a crushing blow. Paul described her as his rock, and her death left him heartbroken. Yet even in grief, Paul found ways to keep going. His love for music gave him strength, and his fans gave him support. Slowly, he began performing again, carrying Linda's memory with him. Paul's journey through tragedy showed his resilience. He had known incredible success, but also deep loss. And still, he kept moving forward. Today, Paul McCartney is more than a musician. He is a living legend. Decades after the Beatles, he continues to write, perform, and inspire. His concerts sell out worldwide, with audiences spanning generations. Grandparents, parents, and children all sing along to songs he wrote more than half a century ago. Paul's legacy is unmatched. He has written or co-written over 1,000 songs, sold millions of records, and influenced countless artists. From Yesterday to Hey Jude, his music has become the soundtrack of people's lives. Beyond the music, Paul has used his fame for good. He has been a strong advocate for animal rights, vegetarianism, and humanitarian causes. His kindness and activism have earned him respect far beyond the stage. Even in his 80s, Paul shows no signs of slowing down. He still records new albums, experiments with different styles, and surprises fans with fresh creativity. He often says that music is simply part of who he is. It's what keeps him alive. From a boy in Liverpool to a global icon, Paul McCartney's journey is one of talent, resilience, and timeless music. He has lived through loss and triumph, but his songs continue to bring joy to millions. His story is not just history, it is still being written.